dad jokes too, because I have a dad bod. I make dad jokes because the idea is if you build it, they will come.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Urban Wildlife Podcast. This is your co-host, Tony Crosdale, along with
the other co-host, Billy Brown.
We're doing a double header tonight. We just recorded a podcast entirely one shot. Like, not just... Often what we do is we record the intros and the in-between, the segues, and then the outro, and splice in interviews. But we actually did the interview. We did the intro, Skyped in with our guest, and then did the outro in one shot. Now we're recording a second.
This goes according to my plans on the editing side. We should have posted an interview with Dr. Travis Longcore from the Urban Wildlands Group in Los Angeles talking about feral cats and strategies that do and don't work to deal with them. I was just reading stuff on, I think, Christian Hunold's Facebook feed. Christian Hunold, Dr. Christian Hunold from Drexel University, who's a friend of ours, friend of the podcast. He's been on a few times. Look for our episode from, I think, last year called Why Not the City, about urban hawks in Philadelphia. And so Christian, being a naturalist like us, who's really into urban wildlife, urban nature, posts a lot of neat stuff, but posts a lot about wildlife-human interactions and how humans regard wildlife, whether as they regard them as pests or neighbors or fellow citizens of the city. And so he was posting something about wild boars. I forget specifically what he posted, but it got me thinking that, like, I've read a bunch of neat stuff about wild boars, and I've been curious to try doing something in some future episodes also, which I might call like species profiles or urban wildlife profiles. And wild boar just seemed like a really fun place to start. These are, and we'll talk a little bit about it in a second. We had an episode back in 2016, April 30th, 2016, called Urban Caracals and Barcelona Boars, where we interviewed Sean Cahill out of Barcelona. We'll talk a little about him in a little bit, but it's been a while, and they pop up in the news, and they're, I think, one of the most fascinating urban wildlife or urban critters we've got. Before I get to that, we'll just remind you to please like us on your podcasting listening app of choice. Please tell your friends about the podcast, assuming you like it. Please let us know what you think of this episode and all the episodes at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Hit us up on Twitter at urbwildlifecast, and you can always find us on Facebook. Aside from being someone you don't want to sit next to at a party, Tony, what's an urban boar?
Well...
And yes, I am a dad.
Yes. I like dad jokes too, because I have a dad bod. I make dad jokes because the idea is if you build it, they will come. So, yes, my wife and I are trying to procreate. So anyway, back to pigs. So the wild boar is the feral version of the domestic pig, which is...
Or the wild version of it, pre-domestication. What do you think?
Right, okay, yeah, so... Yeah, it's interesting how you define it, right? Wild boar, I guess, is...
If you're in Germany, they've always been there.
Right, so wild boar... Yeah, sorry, let's scratch that. There's,
okay.
But we'll keep it in because...
It's different in the United States than it is
I'm thinking,
in Germany.
In the United States, what we call wild boars are feral pigs. In Eurasia, and I believe North Africa... where they're native to. Wild boars, Sus scrofa. There are many types of wild pig in the world, but they look a lot like our pigs, but they have longer tusks. They're hairier. They're not as big in some ways. So, you can see really, really huge domestic pigs. Wild boars are big. They can be up to they're only about 200 pounds for male, 150 for female. Although there have been some big ones in 400-pound range, and one in Georgia, famous, called Hogzilla, was 800 pounds.
And to your point, that one in Hogzilla was apparently a hybrid between wild boar stock that had been imported for hunting and got loose, and then domestic pigs. So it's like that. What we have in North America is this mix of the wild and the feral. You know.
I have experiences in the field with wild boars, both.
I don't. I'm kind of jealous. What do you? What,
Yeah,
what
so
is-
I've seen feral pigs in Texas at I believe was it a Laguna? No, it was Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, famous for the whooping cranes wintering. We saw some there. I've also seen feral ones in Brazil in the Pantanal. I got excited thinking it was. I thought they were going to be peccaries.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah.
I thought they were going to be the white-lipped peccary, which is I never got to see. I smelled them. So when I was in Brazil, I was on. This is exactly 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago I was there. So I was 42, going on 43. I'm literally my birthday's tomorrow. I was in Brazil, and so this is I guess just shy of 10 years. And I was in the Pantanal. And it was a study abroad, but I was like older study abroad, and I had just come back from Alaska, and I was in Alaska for 3 months. I was home for 2 weeks, then went to Brazil for 3 months. It's pretty crazy. And so one of the last stops on this was in the Pantanal, and I befriended the guy who owns the fazenda, this big ranch there. I was like, how big is your property? He's like, for some reason he talked like a Hungarian count, even though he was Brazilian. He's like, it is not very big. It is only 10,000 hectares. Right? And, like, he only has one jaguar, male territory, maybe. You know what I mean? It's like instead of, like, to 10 that is surround him have. I don't know. But anyway, so...
You're always comparing yourself to your neighbors,
Yeah. He was an amateur herper, and he had these pitfall traps that he had to check every day. And he went and showed the class when,
So a pitfall trap it's basically a hole in the ground. Usually you have some kind of fence that stops animals from moving leading up to the pitfall trap. So they move along the fence and they fall in the hole. And then you go in there and you check it to see if they're in there. Yeah.
And so we were out checking the traps, and there's some commotion. He sees that as white-lipped peccaries. I can't see them. I can see the movement. I can smell them. And he's like, look for a tree. If they come this way, climb the tree. And I'm like, what? So that was cool. And then so later, we're hanging out there for almost a week in this ranch in the Pantanal, which is the world's largest freshwater wetland, seasonally flooded savanna with like gallery forest around the rivers. A really cool area. I mean, it's full of caimans and jabiroos and jaguars and tapirs and giant anteaters. It's an incredible place. So one day, Lewis comes up to me, Tony, would you like to accompany me to check the pitfall traps? And I was like, absolutely. He's like, there's only one problem. My brother has the truck, so we must ride horses. And I'm like, no problem. and he says I could bring a couple other people. The rest of the group would be upset, so I arranged for them to get a horseback ride, like just around the ranch, not on the trip. So we're riding through ponds full of caimans on horses, and then I see all these suids, these pigs running across, and I'm like, oh, javelinas, and he's like, no. He's like, they're just feral pigs. They're just it's feral pigs in Brazil.
Damn. All right.
Yeah. So and then I seen wild boars in the true wild in Sri Lanka.
It's understandable if you're coming to this and thinking of pigs as these cute, pudgy animals that live in the barnyard and sit in mud puddles all day. But wild boar have a reputation of being pretty impressive game to hunt. They have, 4-inch or so tusks that could slice you open. Like if you think of like the medieval hunting equipment of a boar spear. Do you know what a boar spear looks like?
Yeah.
What does a boar spear look like?
I didn't realize it was distinct from a regular spear.
Oh, it's the reason the boar spear is
Oh, it has a really big blade. The blade.
It's got a crossbar, so perpendicular to the shaft of the spear. Because if you just happen to spear a boar, it's liable. It has the habit of, even though it's just been speared, running up the shaft of the spear to try to kill you.
Oh.
So you put a crossbar on it to stop the boar from running up the shaft that's through it.
In modern fantasy literature and on television, wild boar played a major role in Game of Thrones when
Indeed.
King Baratheon,
Robert Baratheon.
Baratheon got gored and killed by a wild boar, which was like the impetus of the whole plot of Game of Thrones.
Right.
Was when he died and,
well, he got a little too. Someone got him a little too drunk, and then the boar.
Yeah, I think that was
gored him. And it was a
Littlefinger, right? Yeah.
I don't know. I forget the.
Yeah.
It's been a while. In any case, wild boar. It's when you think of them in that sense, it can actually be a slightly scary animal to have running around your city, but they keep doing it
in a morose, messed up way. And right now, wild boars are in the news because of one of the reasons cited by some pro. I don't want to say pro gun because I don't want to make it polarized that much, but who said it? Like a senator or something said one of the reasons you need to own an assault weapon was...
Somebody on Twitter, was talking about this in Arkansas.
And said you need to... it was someone like significant. That's why it's been going around that you need an assault weapon because you might have to kill 20 to 50 feral hogs on your property.
And I saw that and I was like, okay. They're known for being rather skittish, so I bet if you had one, if you were just trying to scare them off, one shot would do it. But when I look online, for example... You can find videos from people who set up enclosures where you lure the hogs in there and then close the gates and then sort of kill off the whole herd that way. So I don't know if sit there shooting all around with the rifles.
I mean, they absolutely do use, magazine-fed semi-automatic rifles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably the commonest way to hunt them. And, Bill and I differ on guns in lots of ways. But I do own AR-15s and an AK-47 and whatnot, but I'm a leftist, not a libertarian.
I'm not going to argue with the guy about what he needs on his property for hunting boar. I'm not going to get
right, but regardless, I believe that the access to these weapons, including ones that I own, need to be much more restricted, require a lot more training and permits. I just want to go on the record for that. But they are commonly used for that, and they use AR-15 variants. So it's funny, people often refer to assault weapons as being like this incredibly powerful round, and that's actually not true. They actually downsized from World War II. The round the bullets, the cartridges used in World War II were more powerful than they needed. They were heavier. You don't need to shoot someone. Likelihood you're going to shoot someone 1,000 yards is very unlikely. But you need something for up to 300 yards. So a smaller bullet that you can carry more of, a smaller cartridge you can carry more of. A lighter weapon that you can get up to your shoulder quicker tends to win the gunfight rather than something bigger. So the round generally used in an AR-15 is actually generally considered too small for deer or boar, and they use these firearms chambered in larger rounds for boar.
Yeah.
So they're impressive animal. You need something bigger than what you use to hunt people, but not quite what you use to hunt moose. But yeah.
So between a person and a moose. But they've become sort of very common urban animals. And so we thought we'd review a few places where they are common. We mentioned that we had Sean Cahill on to talk about urban caracals and Barcelona boars back in 2016. He's put out an article in 2012, which is why I thought to interview him. He had put out with some other authors. So Cahill, Limona, Cabaneros, Calamardo, and I'm sorry to those folks whose names I butchered, but characteristics of wild boar, sus scrofa, habituation to urban areas in the Collserola Natural Park, Barcelona, and comparison with other locations from Animal Biodiversity and Conservation, again, 2012. This is looking at boar that the population seems to be based in this park next to Barcelona, but a lot of them have become habituated to humans. At least partly from people intentionally feeding them, just kind of like people feeling kind-hearted might feed raccoons or deer, I guess feeding the boar. This habituates and the boar, in particular they're talking about this being the maternal groups where you have the females and their offspring. Males tend to be solo, but these maternal groups of females and offspring will come into the city, particularly when feeding conditions in the summer aren't as good in the forest, and then wander around and sometimes getting fed by people, sometimes eating other things. But once they get habituated, they have to kill them because they're kind of dangerous once they get habituated, in the same sense that you don't want a bear getting used to being fed by people. But the habituated ones tend to be a little bit heavier. They seem to be in better shape. That is, once they've gotten killed because they got habituated. So I'm not saying it's working out for the best for the boar. But they also reviewed reports from other countries, and as of 2010, this is the fun part, came up with 44 cities in 15 different countries where you reported boar problems. And so this pops up, in Rome, Italy, they have plenty of boar. In Hong Kong, we found an article from National Geographic this spring talking about how, particularly in the past 5 years, they say they've gone from just wildlife you'd be lucky to see out in the forest. A lot of Hong Kong you've been in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Birding, right?
On tour with my band.
Yeah.
But then I went birding in a few spots. Did not see any wild boar. They'll call it
This is how I first laid eyes on Tony, because I hadn't met Tony yet. My girlfriend at the time was friends with someone whose boyfriend at the time was Andy from Tony's band, who had just produced a video of Tony birding in East Asia. And so he was like, oh, you gotta check out this video I made. And I was like, I know that name, Tony Crosdale. And so who knew we'd become friends? But
we were destined.
But out in Hong Kong, where it turned out, I've never been there, but Hong Kong there's a lot of green space in Hong Kong. It isn't just skyscrapers, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, part of that is the nature of it. It's a series of islands. They're islands because they're essentially mountains, right? And it's in an estuary, so there's land that you just can't inhabit. It's too steep or it's too marshy, right?
Yeah.
So it happens to,
So it's fine for boar. But people are feeding them and they're getting into the city more. They've got a team of apparently 6 people the government funds or pays for and supports to go out and deal with boar complaints. So it's getting to be a bigger and bigger problem. They're trying birth control methods to control the boar and trying to convince people to stop feeding them. A parallel to our conversations about cats, where really humans feeding animals can be the root of so many problems. In Berlin, they've become particularly famous in urban wildlife circles. It seems like anyone writing an article in general about urban wildlife has to do a stop in Berlin, talk about the boar. We've seen estimates of 3,000 to 5,000 wild boar in Berlin. Berlin apparently has got a lot of green space. Something like 20% of it is forest. Have you been to Berlin?
I have, and I've been there 3 times. There's sister cities there. It's Berlin and Potsdam. And so between the two of those cities, I've been there 3 times, and it's a punk mecca. It's a beautiful city, really cool. Lots of people move there. A lot of expats from all over. Or it's funny how we call Americans or Australians. We call white people moving someplace expats, and then people moving here we call migrants or immigrants. It's kind of a
fair point,
racist or cultural. I don't know, or ethnocentric or xenophobic term. I don't know what do you call it, but anyway, yeah. But I didn't really get out. Unfortunately, I need to go back to Europe.
Well, apparently you should have, because it's 20% forest.
But that's the thing is, you on tours, you just, I spent more time in Europe in the van than outside of it.
Yeah.
Part of that's because I sleep in the van as well. But of the waking hours, I probably spent half of it in the van, getting from city to city.
Yeah. I'm not going to blame you. No, I shouldn't beat you up for it.
Luckily, it's these giant Mercedes Sprinters that are very comfortable to be in.
Well, there you go.
But yes.
So I checked in with a friend of ours, a friend of Gigi and mine named Matthias, who lives in Berlin, and was talking about occasionally stumbling on them when he was out gathering mushrooms in the forests. He pointed us back to a story. I think we talked about this in an earlier podcast episode. I can't remember when. About an 80-year-old retired butcher in Berlin who, in 2018, managed to kill a boar in a supermarket parking lot with a hatchet, and then was basically butchering it. He and his wife were butchering it in the parking lot. This is at night when they were apprehended. A gruesome variation on the human-wildlife interaction. A more scholarly article came out recently about boar in Berlin, and
this is the one saying about the food sources, right?
Yes.
So apparently, wild inside, urban wild boar select natural, not anthropogenic food resources. And Milena Stilfried, Pierre Grass, Matthias Busch, Konstantin Broner, Stephanie Kramer-Schad, Sylvia Ortman. Well, it said that even in the cities, they prefer wild foods like acorns, grubs, rather than trash. And when they examine their stomach contents. They only found, like, of the 200 some boars, they only found like 4, and it was like sandwiches that they had scavenged. But they're mostly eating, wild foods. So it's interesting. So they're not going into the city to take advantage of human food sources. They're just taking advantage of the habitat that's there, the food sources that they would normally eat there. Although they're saying, they don't know what will happen in the future, because often wildlife does adapt to human foods eventually. I mean, I think it's just a matter of, if there's habitat there, why not exploit it?
Or PLOS ONE is the journal that this came out of. This got me thinking. It was funny. I was sitting there, this was on Facebook with Christian. I think we're talking more about Spain or Italy, and I was like, well, it's probably because they don't keep their trash contained. And I was like, wait a second, Berlin. Germans probably keep their trash contained better than any other country on earth. Still, they got tons of boar. And this article is what had me thinking, sort of switched my thinking about more from something like, I'd say like raccoons, which, is happy to be a trash panda, as it were, and trash dive for whatever way they can find. And think of boar more like white-tailed deer, that come into town for what we grow in terms of vegetation more than the handouts. Like, they'll be eating acorns from the oak trees that you plant in parks. They'll be digging up beetle grubs in your lawn, and so end up like tearing up gardens and golf courses and that kind of stuff. And so they're going after that kind of stuff, and maybe what you plant in your gardens, but not so much. I guess they do this also, but their first choice is everything else before but not the trash. On the one hand, I'm a little jealous. Like, I don't want them as invasive animals in the United States. I mean, I believe that. I mean, very strongly that these have a terrible impact on I know they have a terrible impact on native wildlife. Think of a guy I know on Facebook who's a herpetologist. Back when he was doing some research in, I think, the Florida Panhandle on some endangered salamanders in the Florida Panhandle, and there's a picture of him from his research work, like with a rifle next to this massive boar that he had shot, because these boar tear up the breeding ponds of these salamanders, so that on the whatever refuge they were in, they go out and they try to hunt the boars as much as they can. So I sort of respect that. But let's say, still, like, I think of someone living in Hong Kong or living in Berlin or Barcelona, where have you. There's something really neat about having a big, proper megafauna like that running around your city. It's kind of badass.
Without a doubt. I mean, there are some incidences. I mean, the famous one in Japan where a guy got knocked over, and
his commuter got caught between fences with this boar and it just bowled him over.
Yeah, and then it came back, and I think it was probably if you look at the video, it was caught between fences and it felt quartered, and then it probably just, the guy was in its way, knocked it over, and it was probably like, well, I'm gonna attack you again just for good measure, right? Like, best defense is often a good offense. You can imagine,
coming home from work and you're tired and you're thinking what you're going to make for dinner, all of a sudden a wild boar.
Yeah. I mean, they got, their tusks are
nothing to mess with.
Yeah. I mean, that's I just think it's, they have the capacity to injure humans, and, there will be more injuries, but I think about all the mountain lions that would, that will hunt things the size of people and bigger, that live out west in cities that don't kill people. I mean,
they tend not to.
Yeah, and a black bear.
That's my favorite example there.
Yeah, there's 20,000 black bear in our state, Billy and I State, Pennsylvania, which is one of the, in the grand scheme of America, it's in the bottom half. It's one of the smaller states, right? It is. It's like the 30th biggest state. So it's just 30 states.
I like to think of it as a big state, but I guess you're right.
I mean, but it's. It's America. Everything's big, right? Yeah. So, but it's we do have lots and lots of acres of woods, but lots of bears live in the outer suburbs of New York, the outer suburbs of Philly now.
Yeah.
And plus, there are some sizable cities in Pennsylvania, in North Jersey that have bears living right around people.
So I guess my question is, and this is more, we've talked a little bit about Eurasian cities. I'm wondering why they're not in U.S. cities yet.
They might. Here's the deal. They probably are, but in the definition of a city in West Coast standards, or out west standards.
But why aren't they in the Dallas? Are they in Dallas suburbs or
I don't know.
Jacksonville suburbs?
I wouldn't be surprised. I bet you they're in San Antonio, because San Antonio is like in the Texas brushy country there, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I bet you there's wild boar in San Antonio city limits. But granted, like a lot of San Antonio city limits, which San Antonio, by the way, is about to eclipse Philly for sixth biggest city.
Damn it.
But we always have a bigger metropolitan area. They can still grow within their city limits.
There's a lot of these cities that have grown by annexing surrounding suburbs. And, like, Philadelphia stopped doing that in the 1800s.
Yeah.
But then when you got, like, Phoenix and San Antonio that grow by gobbling up their surrounding suburbs, like, yeah, they're going to get bigger in Philadelphia.
In terms of America, I consider Philly the fourth biggest city.
Thank you very much.
It's New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, then Philly.
We're not counting Miami?
Well, and then after that, you got to think, to me, in terms of a city, in terms of big skyscrapers downtown, dense. Miami's probably up there. Seattle, San Francisco, Boston. That everything else is like Houston's bigger than Philly. It's just sprawl.
Yeah, Houston sucks. Yeah. So to follow up on Tony's point about or San Antonio, maybe we'll end the episode here. But I just Googled really fast wild boar San Antonio and found an article from 2018 from News 4, I guess local station in San Antonio. Wild hogs take over San Antonio area neighborhood. So. And a neighborhood on San Antonio's northwest side has a big pig problem. And so they're talking about surveillance video of wild hogs. Again, these are the feral, mix of the imported wild boar hunting stock and just like pigs that have been escaping from captivity since the 1500s, right? Those wild hogs in a San Antonio suburb. So
here's one. Houston area suburbs see uptick in feral hog populations destroying streets property.
There you go. Just it hasn't made the news nationally so much,
yeah.
But apparently my question has been answered.
Man kills 416-pound wild boar in front yard of suburban Houston home.
Damn.
So.
How big? 416
pounds.
It's almost 2 Tonys.
Unfortunately, it's more like a Tony and a third.
Sorry, it's okay. It's definitely bigger than 2 Billies.
Yeah.
So, in any case, that's a lot of hog. So yeah, so I guess we'll be hearing more about them as urban wildlife in the United States as the feral version.
Exotic, invasive.
So yeah, that's our little bit on wild boar. We'll direct you also to Google wild boar on YouTube. There's the video you'll find of the poor Japanese commuter getting gored by a boar. You'll find videos of boar running through Rome. I don't know about this one. There's a pretty gruesome video of a boar in some Russian city where it ends with a driver of a car running it over. So maybe not my favorite. It is pretty easy to find European and Asian wild boar videos, which should give you a sense of how big they are, what they look like, and what would it be like to have one of these in your neighborhood. They're apparently pretty mild until they get injured, and then they get kind of understandably freaked out, and are a lot more of a handful to deal with. But still, give you some sense of like, what is this, especially if you're coming from the United States or Australia or somewhere else that we have listeners, New Zealand, where they don't have any wild boar, I think, then you can get some sense of what is this urban wildlife that either people are enjoying or afflicted by, everywhere from Hong Kong to Barcelona.
And if you have any experiences with urban wild boars, please get in touch. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. If you like our podcast, please like us on your podcast listening app of choice and write us a review. Please tell your friends about it. Please write us an email with your ideas at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Please tweet at us at urbanwildlifecast, and please find us on Facebook.
Cheers. Enjoy yourselves.